As we approach the end of the liturgical year, which will conclude the day before Advent, which is just around the corner, the readings of the Sunday Masses reiterate the theme of preparation, of alertness. And we see that reflected in the final verse of the Gospel today from Matthew 25. Therefore, stay awake, the Lord says, for you know neither the day nor the hour. We know neither the day nor the hour of what? Well, of the moment of God's grace, and ultimately of the moment of the Lord's return. And in order to illustrate this point, of course, the Lord has recourse again to a parable, a story which has a moral, which illustrates the theme that he is trying to communicate to his disciples and to us. And he tells us about 10 bridesmaids. I don't know about you, but 10 bridesmaids in a wedding is pretty big. You know, I've always liked the smaller version of those things. I had a wedding once that had 14 bridesmaids. And exactly. And I guess you'd like to be the dress seller for that wedding because they'd rake it in. But in this parable, there are 10 bridesmaids who are described as foolish or wise. And they went out to meet the bridegroom and to await his coming. Now, what is going on with this parable? What is the context of the background of that story? Well, Dr. Scott Hahn, and he's not the only one, others, describe very succinctly the marriage customs of the time of Christ. And he says that according to the customs of Jesus' day, a bride was first betrothed. We could look upon that as an engagement, but something a little more serious than an engagement, a kind of legal marriage as opposed to a sacramental or church marriage, to impose future categories upon that image. But that first a bride was betrothed to her husband, but continued to live with her family. And it was only after the passage of some time, at an appointed hour, the groom would come to claim her in a sense and lead her, not as his possession, but as his bride, as his wife, and to lead her into his home, to begin a common life together as husband and wife. And that's why, for example, when Mary is told by the angel Gabriel that she should not be afraid to take Joseph, her husband, in, or when Joseph is told by the angel in the dream, I get a little confused, yeah. When Joseph is told not to be afraid to take Mary, his wife, into his home, that means that betrothal has already taken place. So there's already kind of a legal and moral obligation to be married, but they've not yet lived together as husband and wife. So that sounds familiar to us. So that's what was going on. And this parable illustrates that, you know, an example of that, so that these companions of the bride are waiting because the groom coming is a ceremonious occasion, and they go back kind of in a procession to his home, and there'd be a banquet, and then that would commence their married life. Well, the 10 virgins of the parable are members of this bridal party, and they brought their lamps, their little lamps with them, little oil lamps, to provide illumination during their long night vigil, waiting for the groom to arrive. And the symbolism of the characters and the circumstances of this parable are pretty straightforward. The wedding banquet represents heaven, the groom is Christ, the bridesmaids represent the disciples of Christ, and the lamps and the oil they contain represent the gift and the power of faith. While the darkness represents the world, in the worst sense of that term, and the lure of sin. And when the unfortunate takes place, when 5 of the bridesmaids exhaust all of the oil in their lamps, they have to leave their place to search for more oil. Where they will find it in the middle of the night, I do not have a clue. And so they miss the coming of the bridegroom because they weren't ready. Because they were unprepared, they were left out of the feast. And this parable raises a number of questions. And the first one, I think, is why didn't the wise bridesmaids, the ones with enough oil for their lamps, why didn't they share? We're told that the wise bridesmaids said they wouldn't have had enough to share. But aren't we supposed to share our faith? If the oil represents faith in the life of God, isn't that something we're supposed to share, even if it costs us something? Aren't we supposed to help those in spiritual and material need, even if we suffer some loss because of it. I don't think we necessarily have to make our situation worse, and certainly we don't have to make it unbearable in order to serve others, but isn't there a very serious obligation to help those around us who are in need, spiritually and materially, especially when they ask for it, especially when they recognize their need, and especially when their need cannot be met by maybe any other person or any other circumstance? Well, the answer to that, the short answer is yes, of course, we do have that obligation. And we do have that desire, if we're authentic Christians, to find people and to especially respond to those closest to us when they make any need known to us, or when we notice their need. It's not that we have to wait for somebody to tell us. When we become aware of it, that's certainly a kind of call to action for anyone who wants to be a disciple of Christ. However, as this parable makes clear, some things cannot be given, or at the very least, some things cannot be given at the last minute. I mean, think about it. An athlete can help someone to train and to practice. A member of the varsity of whatever sport can take a freshman under his wing and initiate them into the strategies of their sport, help them to find the right exercises that will strengthen them in the ways that they need the most for whatever sport they're playing. He can build up camaraderie and teamship. He can work out with them in the weight room or whatever, in doing calisthenics, anything to build up the body as well as build up the team spirit. But these things can't be done overnight. If the morning of the game someone walks on the field and says, "I want to play," we couldn't expect that the coach would let him on the roster because he hadn't prepared. It's not that no one wants him. It's not that he's perhaps doesn't have potential. It's not that some good would come out of it if he did. But it's like, well, listen, you've had all semester to prepare. You've had all semester to exercise, to practice, to come to practices, to be part of the team. You wait till the last minute. So it's not going to happen. Wait till next season. He'll be excluded, not out of any malice, but just because he had purposefully arranged his life in a way that would exclude him from the team. So I don't think it's the case that the 10 wise virgins were being difficult or self-absorbed. In fact, it's just the opposite. It's the foolish ones who are being self-absorbed. It was the foolish ones who were being difficult. Because instead of building up reserves of faith, instead of preparing for this moment, which they knew was coming, was not a surprise. They were part of the wedding party. They knew that they might have to wait all night. They knew that their lamps would have to be filled, because in the middle of the night, all the stores are going to be closed. They knew this. They did nothing about it. It's like someone going off on a journey in their car. I blessed someone before Mass who had attended the last Mass, and they were on their way to make a road trip. I'm sure the first thing they did was stop at the gas station to fill up the tank. And I'm sure before making that trip, they had the oil checked or changed or looked at the tires and all those sorts of things. We wouldn't go on a road trip with half a tank of gas without any provision for filling it up, and just kind of hoping that something would work out. We would find unclaimed gas can somewhere along the way, or we could ask someone for the money to fill up our tank when we could have done it ourselves if we'd prepared. So it's the foolish virgins, and they deserve that title of foolish, who had every opportunity, but because for whatever reason they were selfish or preoccupied or just self-absorbed, instead of building up their reserves of faith, represented by the oil, they just were kind of coasting along. They were coasting, not making any effort. So the question then for us, the second big question, is how do we imitate the wise virgins of the gospel? Well, I think we look at the negative lesson of the foolish ones. What is their biggest failing? Certainly they weren't prepared, but what's really at the root of that? They were being presumptuous. They were suffering from the sin of presumption. They presumed, they counted on someone else doing the work for them. And that at the very end, their companions would drag them across the finish line. I think it's easy to go through life, if we don't really think about things too deeply, with the presumption that God is going to save us in the end no matter what we do. I hope that's right. But it's presumptuous to think that we don't have to make any effort, that we don't have to correspond, that we don't have to take advantage of the opportunities that God gives us now as a way of building up resources and spiritual reserves for what may come in the future, because we don't know what the future will bring, which is why it's important to be at 100% all the time, so when an unexpected future arrives, we won't be presuming upon the good nature of others, but instead we'll even have extra reserves perhaps that we can extend to others and help them. So when we think about this parable, let's think about ourselves and work to put ourselves on the side of the wise ones as opposed to the foolish ones. Taking the lamp of our soul, which God has given us, filling it with the gift of faith, which is God's gift, but asking for that gift and putting that gift into effect so that it grows and deepens, so that we'll be ready whenever the Lord, the bridegroom, enters into our life.